They called it the Treaty of Crimson Moons, a desperate peace forged in the blood of 1,000 battles between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. The price was simple. One human commander would wed the daughter of their greatest enemy, binding two species in reluctant alliance. What they didn't expect was for Captain Ryan Sterling to discover that his blue-skinned bride, dismissed by her own people as unworthy, possessed a heart vast enough to contain the healing both their worlds desperately needed. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. The crystalline spires of the Zephyrian capital pierced the violet sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces catching the light of twin suns and casting rainbows across the sprawling city below. But within the obsidian walls of the imperial palace, beauty served only to mask the bitter taste of defeat that lingered in every shadow. Captain Ryan Sterling stood in the center of the grand ceremonial chamber, his dress uniform feeling like armor that could not protect him from what was to come. The high, vaulted ceiling above him hummed with alien harmonics, the Zephyrian equivalent of wedding music, though to human ears it sounded more like a funeral dirge. Around him, the assembled dignitaries of two civilizations watched with barely concealed hostility. Humans and Zephyrians alike had lost too much in the war to view this forced union as anything but a necessary humiliation. The purple-skinned aliens whispered among themselves in their musical language, while the human delegation maintained the rigid silence of soldiers at a court-martial. At the far end of the chamber, Emperor Velthak sat upon his throne of living crystal, his ancient face carved from disappointment and pragmatic resignation. The treaty had cost him dearly, not just territories and trade routes, but something far more precious. His daughter. "The bride approaches," announced the court herald, his translated voice echoing through speakers embedded in the chamber walls. Ryan straightened as the massive doors at the chamber's entrance began to open with the grinding sound of stone against stone. He had been briefed, of course, on Zephyrian customs, their culture, their physiological differences from humanity. But no amount of preparation could have readied him for his first glimpse of Princess Liara. She was magnificent, where Zephyrian nobility typically carried themselves with the ethereal grace of beings who seemed to float rather than walk. Liara moved with the grounded confidence of someone who knew her own worth despite a galaxy that questioned it. Her blue skin was deeper in hue than her father's purple, like the ocean depths of a world humanity had never seen. Silver hair cascaded past her shoulders in elaborate braids woven with starlight crystals that caught the chamber's illumination. But it was her size that drew every eye and every whispered comment, in a culture that prized the willowy elegance typical of her species. Liara's fuller figure marked her as different, undesirable, a burden rather than a prize. The assembled Zephyrian courtiers made no attempt to hide their disdain, while several human officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their own prejudices. Ryan felt a surge of unexpected anger at their casual cruelty. Whatever political machinations had brought them to this moment, the woman walking toward him deserved better than to be treated as a consolation prize in a peace negotiation. As Liara drew closer, he could see the careful mask of dignity she wore to shield herself from the judgment surrounding her. But beneath that composure, something else flickered in her violet eyes, a spark of defiance that suggested there was far more to the Emperor's daughter than anyone had bothered to discover. When she reached the ceremonial circle where Ryan waited, their eyes met for the first time. In that moment, he saw not the political pawn he had expected, not the unwanted burden her own people clearly considered her to be, but a woman carrying herself with quiet strength despite a lifetime of others' expectations. "Captain Sterling," she said in perfectly accented basic, her voice like music played on instruments humanity had yet to invent. "I am Princess Liara of the House of Crimson Moons. I believe we are to be married." Her directness caught him off guard. No shy submission, no tears of martyrdom, just straightforward acknowledgement of their mutual predicament. "Your Highness," he replied with a formal bow, "the honor is mine." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Honor? Captain, let us not pretend this is anything other than what it is. A political necessity wrapped in ceremony to make it palatable to our respective peoples." But while the assembled witnesses expected awkward pleasantries and barely concealed resentment, something else began to stir in the space between the human soldier and the Zephyrian princess, something that would prove far more dangerous to the established order than anyone had anticipated. The wedding ceremony proceeded with all the cold efficiency of a treaty signing, which, Ryan reflected grimly, was exactly what it was. Ancient Zephyrian rituals blended with human customs in an awkward fusion that satisfied no one, while binding two lives together in the name of peace. When the formal vows were complete and the assembled crowd began to disperse for the reception, General Corvex of the Zephyrian military approached the newlyweds with the predatory smile of someone about to enjoy another's discomfort. "Well, Captain," Corvex said, his translated voice dripping with false cordiality, "I trust you find your new bride satisfactory, though I understand humans have rather different standards of beauty than our kind." The insult was delivered with the precision of a surgical strike, technically polite, but designed to humiliate both Ryan and Liara in front of the mixed crowd of wedding guests. Several Zephyrian officers chuckled at their general's wit, while human delegates shifted uncomfortably. Ryan felt Liara tense beside him, though her expression remained carefully neutral. He could see the hurt flickering in her eyes despite her efforts to hide it, the accumulated pain of a lifetime of such casual cruelties. "Beauty is a matter of perspective, General," Ryan replied evenly, "though I've noticed that those who mock it most often do so from positions of profound ugliness themselves." The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Corvex's purple face darkened with rage at the suggestion that his character was less than admirable. "How dare you?" the general began, but Ryan continued speaking as if he hadn't heard the interruption. "Princess Liara carries herself with more grace and dignity than I've witnessed in any throne room or war council," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed chamber. "If that threatens your sense of superiority, General, perhaps the problem lies not with her, but with your own insecurities." Several human officers nodded approvingly, while the Zephyrian courtiers looked scandalized. No one had expected the human soldier to so publicly defend his alien bride, particularly not against criticism that many privately agreed with. Corvex's hand moved to the ceremonial blade at his side. "You forget yourself, human. This is not your world, and your crude species has no understanding of Zephyrian standards of worth." "Then perhaps," Liara said quietly, stepping forward with liquid grace, "you would care to enlighten my new husband about those standards." The challenge in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Ryan watched as understanding dawned in the general's eyes. She was baiting him into defining exactly what made someone worthy in Zephyrian society, knowing that any answer would either expose his cruelty or trap him in his own contradictions. "Very well," Corvex said, his tactical mind seizing what he thought was an opportunity to humiliate them both. "Among our people, worth is demonstrated through the traditional trials of mind, spirit, and strength. Perhaps your new husband would care to prove his own value through such a test." The suggestion rippled through the crowd like electricity. It was a clever move. Force the human into a public competition he was certain to fail, thereby justifying the general's contempt while making Liara appear even more pitiable for being bound to such weakness. Ryan looked at his new bride, seeing something flicker in her violet eyes that might have been hope or might have been fear. In that moment, he made a decision that would surprise everyone in the chamber, including himself. "I accept," he said simply. "What did you have in mind?" No one believed the human would dare to attempt such a challenge, but the silence that followed his acceptance spread across the chamber like a gathering storm, charged with the electricity of expectations about to be shattered. General Corvex's smile widened with predatory anticipation as he gestured toward the palace's legendary Hall of Trials, a vast chamber where Zephyrian nobility had tested their worth for millennia. "The first trial is knowledge," he announced to the gathered crowd. many of whom had decided to follow and witness what they assumed would be a spectacular humiliation. You must demonstrate understanding of Zephyrian history, philosophy, and cultural complexity, a task that typically requires decades of study. As they moved through the corridors toward the trial chamber, Ryan found himself walking beside Liara, whose expression had become unreadable. The assembled crowd followed behind them like spectators heading to an execution. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, her voice pitched for his ears alone. Corvex is known for designing challenges specifically to humiliate his opponents. "Maybe," Ryan replied, "but he made one crucial mistake, which is, he insulted my wife." The words surprised them both with their quiet conviction. "Whatever the political circumstances that brought us together, you don't deserve to be treated as a burden or a consolation prize." Liara was quiet for a moment, studying his profile as they walked. "You realize that defending me won't make you popular with either of our peoples? The humans see this marriage as a necessary sacrifice, and my own kind. Well, you've seen how they view me." "Then they're all fools," Ryan said bluntly. "In my experience, the people others dismiss as worthless are often the ones with the most to offer." Something shifted in Liara's expression at those words. A crack in the careful armor she wore to protect herself from constant judgment. For the first time since the ceremony began, she looked at him not as a political obligation, but as a person who might actually see her as something more than her society's definition of her worth. They entered the Hall of Trials, a cavernous space whose walls were covered with holographic displays showing the entire history of Zephyrian civilization. Ancient battles, philosophical treatises, technological achievements, and cultural milestones swirled around them in a dazzling display of accumulated knowledge. "Begin," Corvex commanded, activating the trial systems. "You have 1 standard hour to demonstrate your understanding of our civilization. The computer will ask questions of increasing complexity until you fail. Most Zephyrian students cannot progress beyond the intermediate levels." Ryan stepped up to the central platform, where a shimmering interface awaited his input. But instead of immediately beginning, he turned to Liara with a request that stunned everyone present. "Will you assist me?" he asked simply. "This is your culture, your heritage. I'd be honored to have your guidance." The hall erupted in surprised murmurs. In the history of the trials, no one had ever asked for help. It was considered a sign of weakness, an admission of inadequacy. But Ryan's request carried a different message entirely, that he valued Liara's knowledge and wanted her as his partner rather than a silent observer to his failure. Corvex started to object. "The trials are individual challenges. Outside assistance is forbidden." "Is it?" Liara interrupted, moving to stand beside her husband. Her voice carried a quiet authority that made the general hesitate. "Show me the specific regulation that prohibits collaborative effort in the knowledge trial." As Corvex fumbled through his memory of trial protocols, Ryan realized what Liara was doing. She was using her intimate knowledge of Zephyrian lore and custom to outmaneuver the general who had thought himself so clever. "The knowledge trial," she continued with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow student, "was designed to test understanding of our culture's complexity. Surely the ability to form alliances and seek wisdom from those more knowledgeable represents the highest form of cultural sophistication." The assembled crowd watched in fascination as the general found himself trapped by his own challenge. To refuse would be to admit that Zephyrian culture valued ignorant pride over intelligent collaboration. To allow it would give the human an unexpected advantage. "Very well," Corvex said through gritted teeth. "Let us see how far collaboration can take you." As Ryan and Liara approached the interface together, their hands briefly touched as they reached for the same control. The contact sent an unexpected jolt of connection between them, not just physical, but something deeper, a recognition that they might be stronger together than either had imagined possible. And just when everyone thought they understood the nature of the challenge before them, something was revealed that no one had expected. The beginning of a partnership that would prove far more formidable than any individual effort. What followed was a display of intellectual partnership that left the assembled crowd speechless. Ryan's tactical mind, trained in pattern recognition and strategic thinking, combined seamlessly with Liara's deep cultural knowledge and intuitive understanding of her people's philosophical frameworks. The trial interface projected increasingly complex scenarios, historical conflicts requiring analysis of multiple perspectives, philosophical paradoxes demanding nuanced understanding, technological challenges that tested both theoretical knowledge and practical application. Where Ryan excelled in systematic analysis, Liara provided cultural context. Where she offered intuitive insights, he structured them into logical frameworks. "Fascinating," whispered Dr. Tellen, the palace's chief scholar, to her colleague. "They're not just answering the questions correctly. They're demonstrating a synthesis of human and Zephyrian thinking patterns that creates entirely new approaches to complex problems." General Corvex watched with growing unease as the human-alien pair advanced through levels of the trial that most Zephyrian intellectuals never reached. His plan to humiliate them was backfiring spectacularly, and worse, they seemed genuinely happy working together. "The paradox of the infinite mirror," the interface announced, projecting a complex philosophical puzzle that had stymied Zephyrian thinkers for generations. How does one achieve truth when every perspective reveals only another reflection of limited understanding? Ryan stared at the swirling displays, showing endless recursive loops of reasoning, each seemingly valid perspective undermining the others in an eternal cycle of philosophical impossibility. It was the kind of question that could trap brilliant minds for years. But Liara smiled, a genuine expression of joy that transformed her entire face and made several observers catch their breath at her unexpected radiance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her fingers dancing across the interface as she began constructing her response. "Ryan, do you see it? The question assumes that truth is singular, that there must be one correct mirror among the infinite reflections. But what if truth isn't singular?" Ryan added, following her reasoning. "What if the infinite reflections are the truth, the recognition that reality is too vast for any single perspective to contain?" Working together, they constructed an answer that turned the paradox on its head. Instead of seeking to escape the infinite mirrors, they embraced them as a metaphor for the collaborative nature of understanding. Truth emerged not from finding the one correct view, but from the dialogue between multiple perspectives, each adding depth and dimension to the whole. The interface chimed with a sound that made the assembled Zephyrians gasp. It was the harmonic that indicated not just a correct answer, but an original insight that expanded the philosophical framework itself. "Impossible," Corvex breathed. "That question has never been solved. It's used to demonstrate the limits of reasoning, not as a problem with an actual solution." "Perhaps," Liara said gently, still standing close enough to Ryan that their shoulders touched. "The limits were in the assumption that it had to be solved alone." Emperor Velthak, who had been watching silently from his mobile throne, leaned forward with new interest. For the first time since the wedding began, he was looking at his daughter not with resignation or disappointment, but with something that might have been pride. The trial interface projected one final challenge, not a question, but a statement. "Define the greatest strength of Zephyrian civilization." It was a trap, Ryan realized. Any answer they gave could be used to argue for Zephyrian superiority over human culture, justifying the continuation of hostilities despite the treaty. But as he looked at Liara, he saw understanding pass between them like a shared secret. "The greatest strength of Zephyrian civilization," Liara said, her hand finding Ryan's as they spoke in unison, "is its capacity to grow through connection with what is different, to find truth not in isolation, but in the harmony created when diverse voices join together." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything both civilizations had believed about strength, worth, and the nature of superiority. It wasn't just knowledge they had demonstrated, it was legacy. The possibility that two different species, two different ways of thinking, could create something greater than the sum of their parts. And suddenly, silence fell across the crowd as they realized they weren't just witnessing a trial, but the birth of something entirely new. The completion of the knowledge trial had silenced General Korvex's smug confidence, but it had not silenced his determination to see the human humiliated. The assembled crowd moved to the Chamber of Spirit, where the second trial would test emotional wisdom and moral character. The Trial of Spirit, Korvex announced, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, requires facing one's deepest fears and greatest shames. Many Zephyrian candidates cannot complete this challenge, as it demands absolute honesty about one's inner nature. Ryan noticed how Liara tensed at those words, her hand unconsciously moving to adjust her flowing robes. He was beginning to understand that her apparent confidence masked deep wells of pain, scars left by a lifetime of being judged inadequate by her own people. The chamber itself was a marvel of Zephyrian technology, its walls lined with neural interface crystals that could project mental and emotional states into visible, shareable experiences. What happened here would be witnessed by everyone present, making it impossible to hide behind facades or comfortable lies. "I will go first," Ryan said firmly, stepping toward the central platform before Liara could object. The neural interfaces activated, and suddenly the chamber filled with swirling images drawn from the depths of his memory and subconscious. The assembled crowd gasped as they found themselves experiencing echoes of his thoughts and feelings. They saw his childhood on Earth, a farming community where he had learned to value hard work and loyalty over superficial appearances. They felt his pride when he joined the military, his determination to protect what he loved, even at personal cost. And then came the war. The battle at Zerion's edge materialized around them in visceral detail, the screaming of plasma cannons, the acrid smell of burned atmosphere, the weight of command decisions that meant life or death for thousands. But what struck the observers most was not the violence, but Ryan's response to it. They felt his anguish every time he ordered an attack that he knew would cost both human and Zephyrian lives. They experienced his sleepless nights wondering if there might have been another way, a path to peace that his limited perspective had failed to see. Most surprisingly, they witnessed his growing respect for Zephyrian tactical brilliance even as he fought against it. "I became a soldier to protect others," Ryan said aloud, his words echoing through the chamber as his memories continued to flow. "But every enemy I killed was someone else's child, someone else's beloved. The hardest part wasn't facing death. It was living with the knowledge that my victories came at the cost of others' dreams." The neural projection shifted to show his thoughts during the treaty negotiations, his relief that the killing would finally stop, mixed with apprehension about what peace might cost. And then came his first briefing about the marriage requirement. The assembled crowd expected to see resentment, disgust, or at least reluctant resignation at being forced to wed an alien. Instead, they witnessed something that made several Zephyrian observers shift uncomfortably. Curiosity about who Liara was as a person, concern about how she might be feeling about the arrangement, and a growing determination to make the best of a difficult situation for both their sakes. "My greatest fear," Ryan continued, his voice steady despite the intimate vulnerability of the moment, "is not death in battle or political failure. It's the possibility that I might become the kind of person who sees others as expendable, who values convenience over connection, who chooses comfort over courage when it matters most." The neural interfaces registered the absolute sincerity of his words, confirming that this was not performance, but genuine self-revelation. General Korvex's face showed growing discomfort as he realized the trial was once again not proceeding as he had planned. But the greatest surprise came when the projections showed Ryan's first sight of Liara in the ceremonial chamber. Instead of disappointment or forced acceptance, the assembled crowd experienced his immediate protective anger at the casual cruelty directed toward her, his admiration for her dignified composure under pressure, and something else that made several observers inhale sharply in recognition: attraction. Not just physical, though. He found her beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with conventional standards. He was drawn to her intelligence, her strength, the way she carried herself despite a lifetime of others' judgment. In the few hours since meeting her, he had begun to fall in love with his wife. "The trial is complete," the interface announced, as Ryan's projections faded back into memory. Liara stared at him with wonder and something deeper, gratitude that someone had finally seen her as she truly was, not as a burden or a political necessity, but as a woman worthy of genuine affection. "Your turn," Korvac said harshly, clearly hoping that Liara's inner revelations would prove more embarrassing than her husband's inconvenient nobility. But as Liara stepped forward to undergo her own trial of spirit, her violet eyes met Ryan's with new understanding. She was no longer facing this challenge alone, and what the neural interfaces would reveal about the depth of her own hidden strengths and the true nature of her feelings for the human who had defended her would shock everyone present, most especially herself. But the final revelation came not from the technology, but from a name that Ryan spoke as the trial concluded. A name that made Emperor Velthak rise from his throne in stunned recognition: Beloved. As Liara stepped onto the neural interface platform, the chamber's crystals began to glow with the soft blue radiance that indicated deep emotional resonance. The assembled crowd prepared themselves for what they assumed would be a predictable display of shame and inadequacy, the inner life of someone who had never quite measured up to her society's expectations. Instead, they found themselves immersed in a mind of stunning complexity and hidden strength. The projections began with childhood memories, a young Liara exploring the crystal gardens of the palace with insatiable curiosity, asking questions that challenged the assumptions of her tutors, creating art and music that blended traditional forms with innovative approaches that scandalized the court. They experienced her growing awareness that she was different, not just in body, but in the way she thought about problems, the connections she made between seemingly unrelated concepts, the empathy she felt for those deemed lesser by her society. Where other Zephyrian nobles saw rigid hierarchies, she saw opportunities for harmony across differences. "I was 7 when I first realized that my father's courtiers spoke differently to me than to my siblings." Her voice echoed through the chamber as the memories flowed. Their smiles never reached their eyes when they looked at me. It took me years to understand why. The projections shifted to show her adolescence, the growing pressure to conform to impossible standards, the casual cruelties disguised as helpful advice, the gradual erosion of her natural confidence under the weight of constant judgment. But what struck the observers most was not her pain, but her response to it. Where others might have become bitter or withdrawn, Liara had turned her energy outward. They witnessed her secret visits to the palace's lower levels, where she taught literacy to servant children, her anonymous donations to refugee aid programs, her quiet interventions when she witnessed injustice, always careful to work behind the scenes to avoid drawing attention that might undermine her efforts. "My size became my shield," she explained as the images showed her moving unnoticed through gatherings of nobility, invisible precisely because they refused to truly see her. "When people look through you, they don't notice what you're actually doing." General Korvac shifted uncomfortably as the projections revealed some of his own past actions, moments of casual cruelty towards subordinates that Liara had witnessed and quietly worked to remedy. Several other courtiers found themselves seeing their own behavior reflected in her memories, and the view was not flattering. But the most shocking revelations came when the neural interfaces reached her thoughts about the marriage arrangement. Instead of the resentment or despair everyone expected, they witnessed something extraordinary: hope. "I had given up on the possibility of love," Liara admitted, her words carrying across the hushed chamber. "I thought I would live my entire life as a disappointment to be tolerated, a burden to be managed. But when Captain Sterling looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in my life, I saw myself reflected in someone else's eyes as worthy of respect." The projection showed her growing fascination with human culture, her study of their history and values in preparation for the marriage. Where the Zephyrian court saw this union as a humiliating necessity, she had begun to see it as an opportunity, a chance to build something new with someone who might value collaboration over domination. And then came her feelings about Ryan himself. The crowd gasped as they experienced the depth of her attraction to his integrity, his protective instincts, his willingness to stand up for others even at personal cost. In the space of a few hours, she had begun to fall in love with a man who saw her not as damaged goods, but as a partner worthy of respect and affection. "My greatest shame," she said as the trial neared its conclusion, "was believing for so long that my worth was determined by others' approval. My greatest fear is that I might pass that weakness on to others, that I might become complicit in diminishing someone else the way I allowed myself to be diminished." The neural interfaces confirmed the absolute honesty of her self-revelation, but they also registered something else that made Emperor Velthak step forward with growing amazement. Beneath her gentle exterior lay a mind of extraordinary strategic brilliance, a deep understanding of political and social dynamics that she had hidden for years to avoid threatening those around her. As the projections faded, Liara and Ryan stood together at the center of the chamber, their hands finding each other with the natural inevitability of two people who recognized their perfect complement. The assembled crowd stared at them in stunned silence, forced to confront the possibility that they had all been profoundly wrong about what strength looked like. "The trial is complete," the interface announced. "Both candidates have demonstrated exceptional moral clarity and emotional wisdom." General Korvax's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. His careful plan to humiliate the human and expose the princess's inadequacy had instead revealed them both to be exactly the kind of leaders their civilizations desperately needed. "There remains one final trial," he said through gritted teeth. "The test of physical courage. Surely the human will falter when faced with true Zephyrian combat prowess." But as Ryan and Liara exchanged a look of perfect understanding, everyone present realized they were no longer watching two individuals facing separate challenges. They were witnessing the emergence of something far more dangerous to the status quo than anyone had anticipated: a true partnership. And as they walked away from the completed trial, no one dared mock the princess again, for they finally understood what they had witnessed. The unveiling of two extraordinary souls who had chosen each other despite everything their worlds had told them about worth, beauty, and the nature of love. 6 months after the wedding that was meant to seal a reluctant peace, the crystalline spires of the Zephyrian capital sang with a different harmony. The sound carried across the violet sky to where Ryan and Liara stood on the balcony of their shared quarters, watching the sunrise paint impossible colors across the alien landscape. The physical trial had never taken place. After witnessing the profound connection revealed in the trials of mind and spirit, Emperor Velthak had declared the testing complete, and more importantly, had formally recognized his daughter as his chosen heir. The courtiers who had once dismissed her now sought her counsel, having finally understood that her different perspective was exactly what their civilization needed to grow beyond its ancient limitations. "The human delegation arrived this morning," Liara said, her hand resting comfortably in Ryan's as they watched ships descend through the morning sky. "Ambassador Fletcher seemed surprised to see you looking so content." Ryan laughed, pulling his wife closer to his side. She had grown more radiant over the months of their marriage, her natural confidence blooming under the influence of genuine love and respect. The court fashion had even begun to change, with Zephyrian designers creating new styles that celebrated diverse body types rather than adhering to rigid traditional standards. "Fletcher expected to find me counting the days until I could return to Earth," he admitted. "He never imagined I might have found something here worth staying for." "Something?" Liara raised an eyebrow with mock indignation. "Someone," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Someone who taught me that the universe is far more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." Their partnership had transformed more than just their personal lives. The collaborative approach they had demonstrated in the trials had inspired a new model of human Zephyrian cooperation. Joint research projects, cultural exchanges, and trade agreements had flourished under their example. Where once there had been suspicion and hostility, there was now curiosity and mutual respect. The Council of Worlds has requested that we address their assembly next month, Liara mentioned, showing him a formal invitation encoded in both human text and Zephyrian harmonics. They want to discuss our model for interspecies collaboration as a template for other diplomatic relationships. Do you think it will work? Ryan asked. What we've built here, can it survive being examined and imitated by politicians and bureaucrats? Liara was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the thoughtful intelligence that had made her such an effective leader. What we've built isn't a political strategy or a diplomatic protocol, she said finally. It's a choice to see others as complete beings worthy of love and respect, regardless of how different they might appear. That's not something that can be legislated or mandated. It has to be chosen, one relationship at a time. A chime from their communication system interrupted the peaceful moment. Princess Vera, Liara's younger sister, appeared in the holographic display with news that made both of them smile. Sister, you need to see the latest reports from the outer colonies, Vera said, her excitement palpable even through the transmitted image. 3 more interspecies marriages were announced this week, and the colonial administrators are requesting guidance on new family structures that accommodate different cultural approaches to partnership and child rearing. It's spreading, Ryan mused, watching Liara's face light up with joy at the news. The idea that love can transcend the boundaries we create to separate ourselves from each other. Like ripples in a cosmic pond, Liara agreed. Each choice to see beyond surface differences creates new possibilities for connection. As they prepared to face another day of meetings, negotiations, and the careful work of building bridges between civilizations, Ryan reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a soldier resigned to a marriage of political necessity. Today, he was part of something far greater. A living example that the greatest strength lay not in domination or superiority, but in the courage to remain open to love in all its unexpected forms. Their final visitor that morning was General Corvex, who arrived with the stiff formality of someone delivering a message he would rather not speak aloud. Your Highnesses, he said with a reluctant bow, the Emperor has asked me to inform you that the new treaty protocols have been approved by both governments. The alliance between our peoples is no longer conditional or temporary. It is permanent, sealed, not by fear of mutual destruction, but by hope for mutual flourishing. As the general departed, clearly uncomfortable with his role as messenger for a peace he had tried to undermine, Liara and Ryan exchanged a look of perfect understanding. They had not just survived the trials designed to test their worthiness, they had transformed the very definition of what it meant to be worthy. In a universe that had been built on the assumption that differences meant inevitable conflict, sometimes all it took was one couple's courage to love across those differences to prove that harmony was not just possible, but beautiful. Their marriage had begun as a political necessity, but it had become something far more precious, a testament to the truth that the heart recognizes no boundaries save those it chooses to honor. And in the crystal gardens of the palace, where children of a dozen different species now played together under alien skies, the future they had chosen to build together continued to bloom, with possibilities as infinite as the stars themselves.